It is my great pleasure to introduce Lauren Varriale, MS OTRL. She's an occupational therapist who specializes in neurological rehabilitation in ALS, spinal cord injury, MS, Parkinson's disease, stroke, and brain injury. Lauren runs the Northwell Health Sports Therapy and Rehabilitative Services, also known as S.T.A.R.S, their seating and wheelchair clinic. Lauren is very talented in creating the proper modifications specifically for her patients to obtain optimal independence, comfort, and in their daily lives. She is instrumental in the development of the ALS clinic at Northwell Health on Long Island. I'm happy and proud to say that I've worked with Lauren at the Northwell Clinic in Great Neck since its infancy in 2019. We are lucky to have her share her experience on the wheelchair process with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Lauren Varriale.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to get my slides going. Okay. All right, so let me just close this. Hold on. Okay. Okay, so thank you all for joining this morning. Thank you, Teresa, for introducing me. As she mentioned, my name is Lauren Varriale. I am the occupational therapist at Northwell Health S.T.A.R. Rehabilitation. And I am going to discuss the wheelchair assessment process. It is a long, lengthy process, so a lot of times patients do have many questions about what that process really entails and why it takes so long. Common questions that I often get asked: who qualifies for a wheelchair? What is the actual process of getting a wheelchair? What wheelchair is right for me? When do I obtain the wheelchair? Where do I get a wheelchair from? And why go through insurance? So I will answer those for you coming up. So a lot of times when we talk about wheelchairs, we talk about Medicare setting the precedence. Most of the insurance companies follow Medicare guidelines. And what that means is that whatever Medicare's rules are, those insurance companies follow them. So somebody who is going to work and obtaining, a private insurance through their job still oftentimes gets hit and limitations with the Medicare guidelines. Medicare follows an in-home rule, meaning that they will only provide a wheelchair that being used for in your home. So the fact that you're still working and you need to leave your home to go to an office or wherever that location is, does not apply, which is very frustrating because a lot of times in order to get these wheelchairs, you have to leave to go see a doctor face to face to perform this. So they don't care that you have to leave the house and, drive over to the doctor's office and be seen just to prove that you need it for in the home. There's a lot of barriers that come with this. Hopefully with a lot more fighting, we can kind of change those rules with Congress. The other guideline factors is that Medicare sets is that the equipment must improve the ability to participate in your mobility related activities of daily living. They're called the MRADLs. So it's things like getting into your closet to pick out your clothes, getting into your cabinets to retrieve food items, things of that nature. It must be medically necessary, meaning that there is no other option for you. This is the only thing that's going to allow you to be as independent or participate in your MRADLs as possible. And it has to be the least costly option. So if you have the capacity to push yourself in a manual wheelchair, they want you to pick a manual wheelchair in order to get around, because manual wheelchair is a lot less costly than a power wheelchair. The equipment, which all medically coded power and manual chairs they have a reasonable use life. It's part of their requirement to hit that of 5 years. So That means that your wheelchair, the frame of your wheelchair, the base of your wheelchair, will be able to sustain 5 years. That doesn't mean that you can't get parts like batteries replaced or new tires when they get worn, but it's meant to last the duration of that 5 years. If you think about like leasing a car, the car has its own little warranty, right? And there's things that you have to get done, like an oil change or things like that. But when your lease is over, you're no longer covered for that, cost of the car working itself. Um, Medicare also says that this wheelchair is the only wheelchair that's covered in that 5-year duration. So they only pay for one wheelchair at a time. There are some loopholes that we can kind of navigate. For instance, if someone's unable to drive their power chair any longer and they want to switch over to a manual tilt and space chair, there are some things that we can kind of justify to allow another wheelchair with a lot of limitations. So after that, there's no going back. Um, and then durable medical equipment, or DME, is only coded through Medicare Part B. So if you receive Medicare Part A and you have a secondary insurance, that secondary insurance is going to become primary if only the Medicare Part A is in place. So you do have to make sure that Medicare Part B is also in place at the time of ordering a wheelchair. Medicare considers, because they follow that in-home rule, they do cover powered mobility devices, which is a power wheelchair, but they also claim to cover power operated vehicles like a scooter. So a scooter falls under a power operated vehicle. However, the trick that they get away with is that scooters are not considered in-home. They're marketed for outdoor mobility. So even though they do have a Medicare CPT code, which is a medical billing code, they are not covered through Medicare. Medicare will not cover a scooter in general. So if a scooter is something that you're really adamant about having in the beginning, you can reach out to me and I will quickly guide you away from that. There's other chairs that are more of that transitional chair that I would like for you to be sitting in instead of a scooter. So like I mentioned before, it is a very long process. So when do you start? We recommend starting as soon as possible. So if you're noticing that you're having difficulty walking those longer distances, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily in your house only, but those longer distances, getting into a medical appointment, or just having inability to juggle the endurance part of getting around and participating in family activities, then that's where you want to start to say, okay, I think it's time. For instance, I had a patient who was really cooking was their thing on Sundays. And she said, Sundays exhaust me the worst because I'm trying to work on my balance to stand, but she's cooking with her family at the same time. It was exhausting. So we discussed, like maybe it's time for the power chair, and maybe you just use the power chair during Sundays when you're having this long event. And to much avail, finally, after a lot of arguments, she caved in, and it was the greatest thing for her. It completely changed. She's like, I have more endurance participating in those activities. By the end of the day, I'm not so exhausted as I was. Trying to stand and balance yourself can really be fatiguing, as I'm sure most of you guys are aware. So that's an alert. So even though you're getting around the rest of the week, or things, are seamless the other times, think about that's a sign that maybe things are ready to change. And knowing that it's a long process, you should get started sooner. So this is usually like a 4 to 6 month process. So in 4 to 6 months, a lot can change, and knowing, hey, maybe it's time to consider it. I tell patients all the time, I do not glue anybody down into their chair. So having a power chair to go those longer distances, and then, when you're in the house, navigating your house and letting the chair sit in the corner in the beginning is absolutely okay. Um, If you've also had some recent falls in the house, that's also a sign to kind of consider where you're saving your energy for. And then, if you have difficulty changing your position, a lot of people, when they first get diagnosed, they switch over to recliner chairs. And those recliner chairs are really made for everybody, right? It's not custom to you, it's not supporting you. So a lot of times people come in and they have pelvic deformities, and they have a curvature in their spine, and my first question is, what are you sitting in all day? And 9 times out of 10, it's already an existing recliner chairs for some people are so oversized that it allows these postural deformities to occur because gravity is pushing on you in all the wrong directions. So, a power chair gives you not only the ability to change your position like a recliner chair does, but it gets you from point A to point B. So, it has added benefits compared to, just sitting in a recliner chair. The other thing is, there's something, those foldable power chairs. I like to call them lawn chairs on wheels, because that's exactly what it is. It is a terrible seated chair that doesn't make anybody feel comfortable, but it gets you from point A to point B. If you're spending more time in that chair, like you get from point A to point B and you stay in that chair, that's a sign that you should consider something more custom. So where do you begin? Well, you start with your ALS clinic, right? You go into clinic, you're seeing therapists, and I try to speak to all the therapists in the New York area about, when's a good time, alerting, the referral time of when to get a wheelchair. And if you're unsure, I mean, you can bring it up and say, I'm noticing things have changed in the last 3 months since I was here. And even if it comes up in between those ALS clinic sessions or visits, that's okay too. You can reach out and say, hey, I'm having a little more difficulty. I just want to get onto the wait list, because there is a wait list for wheelchair clinics. Wheelchair clinics, unfortunately, there's not many in, this area anymore, just because reimbursement rates are so poor. So a lot of our clinics have closed down, and I know for a fact that my wait list is currently 6 months. So if you think about the waiting on that list for, 6 months, and then waiting for the chair, which is another 4 to 6 months, it's a year-long process. I do try to expedite some of my pals, because there's so much that can change in that 4 to 6 months. So I do try to get people in as quickly as possible. But I mean, wheelchair clinics are limited to how often and how frequently they're in session. So when you do get onto that wait list, and you finally get an appointment, you have what's called an evaluation. That evaluation encompasses quite a few things. So Medicare requires a seating specialist, who's usually an OT or a PT, to be present along with a vendor. That assistive technology provider is similar to a pharmacy. And what happens is, there was a lot of fraud many, many years ago that required Medicare to change that law and force this cohesive kind of evaluation to occur. So there, the fraud that was occurring was that the vendors were going in, and because they make commission off of what they sell you, there was a lot of like overabundance in the evaluation. So the role of the OT and the PT is to really just keep it appropriate and advocate for you as the pal coming in. We know what the expectation is and the progression, and I don't have a crystal ball for what the next 5 years looks like, but I try my hardest to kind of guess, where you started to where you're at the day of evaluation. And I work with the vendor to say, this is what would be best. So I take into consideration your specific needs. I'm going to ask you, what are your interests? What are your most important things? So, my patient who was the most adamant thing that she wanted was those Sundays, those long Sundays with the family. That's what she lived for. So that was important to me to think of the features on the chair. Can she raise herself up so that she'll be able to look into the pot and participate in, the cooking aspect of it? Can she adjust, her eye level so that she's not constantly looking up at, and straining her neck? So those are the things that said, those are must haves. And the vendor works with me to write that process up. And me as the evaluator, I do not get compensated at all. The only compensation I get is for the visit through the insurance company. So it's just an occupational therapy evaluation. And that's a pretty important point that people don't always understand. I have zero financial relationship or nothing, I have no skin in the game. So again, the evaluation takes place with the patient, the PALs, the therapist, and then the vendor. So again, I tell every single patient that comes in, I'm going to get to know you really fast. We're going to become lifelong friends, best of friends in 30 seconds. I'm going to ask about your physical aspects at home. Who are you living with? How is your home environment look like? When you're home alone, what are you required to do and what do you need help with? Do you have any help? What does that help look like? Is it consistent? What's the medical history aside from having ALS? And what's the social history? There's a lot of patients that come in and they're legally married, but they're not truly together, or they don't want that caregiver responsibility that they want to be the spouse role and they want somebody else to play the caregiver role, which is completely appreciated as well. But I need to know who those people are and how consistent they are. There's a lot of times where people say, yeah, I have an 8-hour aide, but they don't show up all the time or they show up late. So we have to discuss, how are you getting into this chair? How are you opening the door for that home health aide when they finally do show up? I also want to know things like, your bowel and bladder functioning, right? So I need to know, am I putting an incontinence cover on that cushion on that chair so that we don't ruin the electronics on the chair if you have bladder leakage? I want to know about the past medical history and the past surgical history. Were there previous deformities or is these changes simply from neurologic scoliosis, right? So there's different factors that I'll consider, and also your spasticity. Is today a good day or is this not such a good day? Is this the worst your spasms are typically, and what else do you suffer with during the day? And then I'm looking at transportation. How do you get from point A to point B on a daily basis, not just for medical appointments? Medical appointments, a lot of times, some insurances cover ambulance. Sometimes they cover different, you have ALS United coming to get you. But a lot of people don't have that for everyday things. So do they have things like Able Ride or, the county transportation? I need to know that so that I can think about how I am securing that wheelchair down in your van or in your car. And then I get you onto the mat and I look at your body in supine, which is lying down on your back. So I want to see the effects of gravity. So when you're lying down, there is no gravity pushing on your spine or your pelvis. So I can see, are we even? Do we have scoliosis while you're lying down? And then what happens when you're sitting up? So once gravity takes into effect, how does that change on your respiration? How does that change on your bowels and bladder? And what does that do for your core ability or lack of core? So I kind of take that into effect. And then I take all these measurements because, as I said, these are custom wheelchairs. These are built for you. They are not designed for other people. They're meant for your, physical being. And I do account for some muscle atrophy that will potentially occur. So I kind of have this whole process going through my head while I'm getting to know you. And my wheels are constantly spinning. So I do kind of consider everything. And there's so many patients that say, why do you need to know that about me? Because I think about things that you wouldn't think about. That's my job. Okay. And then, as I mentioned, you do trial the equipment there. So there's things that I will try to have present. And then there's sometimes things that, if you're not able to drive with like a power chair with a standard joystick, you need an alternative drive control because your hand is very weak, or you have one stronger, body part than I have available. I will have you come back if need be. And then, once we all agree that this is what is going to be the best plan, then we'll generate the order together. Everything is done with you in mind. You're present for it. And I do take some liberties. I'll say, we're going to talk shop for a minute, and we kind of work out some of the logistics of what's holding up, some barriers. Is it the house barrier, the car barrier, physical barriers? But we do kind of incorporate all of that, and you're very active in this evaluation. And then the lengthy part comes. So the required documentation. So you come meet with me, right? Because Medicare and any insurance following Medicare guidelines requires the wheelchair seating and positioning evaluation to occur with myself and the vendor. And then there's a home assessment. So a lot of times we do, I'll use Google Earth, or, I'll ask for pictures of the house when you get home. And we'll use those measurements based on what we can see available to us. And sometimes we'll actually say, you know what, it's too close for comfort. We're going to send a walkthrough home assessment. And so the vendor will send one of their drivers with the chair to go through the house, your living space, to make sure that the chair is going to fit and that there are no barriers in that regard, because nobody wants to make a $35,000 mistake. And that's how costly some of these power wheelchairs can be with all the parts on it. Then I write up a really detailed letter of medical necessity. I tell all the patients, don't read what I write about you, because sometimes it's not so flattering. The people who read this at the insurance companies, they're not necessarily specialists in wheelchairs. They're trained to find ways to deny and save money, right? So in that regard, I have to be a very creative writer to justify, like, how do I paint this picture of why you need this wheelchair in this letter? Because all they're seeing is this black and white letter that it needs to jump out for them to be like, no, we need to give them this wheelchair. So I always tell people my creative writing skills are never held back. And I had a patient read it once who said, I can't believe you think that of me. And it's not that. I just need to justify it so that they read that and are convinced. After that, you have to have what's called a face-to-face evaluation. So a lot of the ALS clinics are really great at doing this ahead of time. Basically, it's a formal evaluation that Medicare says that you have to sit in front of the doctor, and the doctor has to say, yes, I agree, you need a power wheelchair. Yes, I agree, you need a manual wheelchair. And these are the reasons why. And if that's not performed, or if that's not adequately written out, we need the doctor to addend that note to really specify why that's required. Um, it's a it's sometimes tedious thing. Sometimes, it depends on the parts that we're asking for, but if they make you to be like, yeah, you're walking with braces and you're doing fantastic, the insurance company is going to read it and say, you don't need a wheelchair then. You're walking with braces and there's no reason for anything else. So we have to just kind of put in the functional aspect of it, right? You're walking with braces, but it's not functional. You're not walking over to a cabinet, getting a glass out of the cabinet, walking over to the sink with that glass, filling it up, and then bringing it over to the table. So we have to really have, we fine tooth comb that verbiage from your doctor and say, can you please go back and say, you are not a functional ambulator. You might be walking in therapy. You might be walking from point A to point B, but you're not functioning after that point, because insurance is looking to save $35,000. After my letter is signed and the face-to-face evaluation is received, Then comes what's called a standard written order. The standard written order is basically an attestation that says, I'm going to jump ahead because I did all this already. This is your standard written order. So basically it's there was a time that a company frauded Medicare, and Medicare got smart. What happened was the doctor said, I didn't sign that. That was a stamp signature. You can't prove that I signed that. Anyone in my office could have taken that stamp and put it on that paper. So you can't hold me accountable. So Medicare said, well, from now on, the doctor, not anyone else, is going to sign and write in all this information. So they write in your name, what's being ordered, they write their name printed neatly, and if it's not neat, if it's illegible, they will make them redo it again, and then they sign on and date this order. This has to be done in a specific timeline. So the letter of medical necessity has to be signed first, the face-to-face has to be signed, then comes this paperwork. So if it's not in due diligent order, Medicare denies it as well. And then the last form that they sign is a very detailed letter, basically a prescription with each and every part on that signed, detailed out, and then they have to sign and date this page as well. Once those documents get collected, then it gets submitted to the insurance company. And then from there, it's uh, insurance legally has 30 business days, which is about 5 weeks. It's a very lengthy time that they legally have to respond. And sometimes, a lot of times, Medicare is doing a much better job than some of the private insurances right now, with acknowledging the need of equipment and approving the requested items. You know, we don't ask for anything that you don't truly need. The hard part is that they don't do preventative stuff. So if we know that in the next 5 years you're going to need an item, you know, it's hard to justify when you don't currently need it. So we try to kind of summarize as much as possible. And then if you need something down the line, we always can go back to the insurance and say, hey, progression kicked in and we need new equipment. Once the insurance approval is received, then the chair is built. So that's about, it really depends on which kind of chair you're doing. There's some brands of chairs that they prioritize ALS because they understand the severity of, you know, how quickly things change. So they do prioritize all of those diagnoses and will expedite the assembly line for the build of them, and they can get chairs out in 2 days. But on average, it's about 10 to 12 days. So that's another business days again. So that's another 2 to 3 weeks that you're waiting just for the chair to be customized. And then not every part comes from the same manufacturer. So the wheelchair base comes different than, you know, sometimes the wheels on a manual chair, or the power chair base, you know, it has a cushion and a backrest that come from different companies. So the chair, the cushion, the backrest, all three different companies. And then you have a joystick handle, and that's a fourth company. There's different electronics, there's different cables that run on those things, and it's not all being mass produced ahead of time from the same factory. So there is a lot of waiting. And during COVID, I know nobody likes to talk about that time, but during COVID, when everyone was having the chip shortage, power wheelchairs take 30 to 35 chips in a chair. So when COVID occurred and chips were really struggling to be produced, these wheelchair companies had to go back and redo how they do a lot of their electronics. So there are some pros and cons to that. There's less chips being required now, but there's some issues with some of the electronics duration. So we're kind of in this strange point because, right, we're at the 5 year mark for power chairs delivered around COVID time. So we're learning from that, and we're trying to make changes to make it better overall. Once that chair gets shipped, all the parts from all the different manufacturers go to the vendor. The vendor installs the parts onto that chair and delivers it to the clinic. And that's where you will come back to the clinic and make those final fittings. We teach you how to use the chair. We make all the fine-tuned tweaks so that you're comfortable with the chair. And we train everybody who's needed. We want to make sure that driving is still a possibility, right? So there's electronic changes we could do for power chairs. There's manual adjustments that we can do for, manual tilt and space chairs, and it's a never ongoing thing. I mean, it's always an ongoing thing. It's never a one and done. So we always tell you, we become your best friends. We want to hear from you all the time. So even if it's a week from delivery, we want you to come back. There's a lot of people who come back right after. Hospice. You cannot enter hospice while waiting for the wheelchair. The wheelchair has to be delivered and processed through the insurance. So, if we're talking about, 4 to 6 months to get a wheelchair, you're talking 4 to 6 months plus 3 extra days from time of delivery, because that has to be processed through before you can enter. There's a lot of confusion about just even starting the evaluation for a hospice. So once an evaluation for hospice is made, it does flag your insurance company that there's a pending assessment. So you have to just let me know if that was a discussion during ALS clinic, because I have to I have to respond and say, we know that there was a request being made, but that's not occurring at this time. Otherwise, they will come back and deny it and say, well, it's flagged for hospice. Also, once you get the chair, you can't get repairs done to the chair once you're on hospice. So we do kind of want to keep in mind that, there are some things that we're very limited by once you join hospice. And a lot of people enter hospice for different reasons. It's not necessarily for end of life, it's more for assistance and all the other wonderful things hospice does. But it does interfere with the wheelchair. So talk to your therapist, your wheelchair specialist, about what that next step would look like. I'm just going to show you some manual wheelchairs. There's 2 different kinds of manual wheelchairs. There's a rigid frame and a folding frame chair. Basically, it just shows how it folds. So if you see on the left side, there's an X frame. It kind of like closes up like an accordion. And then there's a rigid frame chair. Again, these are things that you're going to discuss with the therapist who's evaluating you based on a lot of different factors: your transportation, your home environment. There's definitely one pro over the other when identifying a chair. There's also power assist type chairs where there's different features on the chair that can be added. This one is still a manual chair, but it has an oblong shaped hand rim so that it's easier to make contact with to propel the chair. My video is not going to play. That's okay. And then the power assist manual chairs. So power assist, and I always, for people with ALS, I'm just jumping ahead because I'm going to talk you guys through. So there's a motor on this inside the axle of this wheelchair. It's still manual chair. So when you're sitting dependently, you still have to have a lot of movement in your upper body to readjust your position to not get any pressure ulcers, or just for comfort. Just adjusting yourself, it becomes a problem when you're talking about power assist or power add-on systems. So again, this is a manual chair with a power assist. This one happens to be the Smart Drive, but there's other ones on the market. It in this regard, it just gives you a little extra push. It's almost like someone's behind you pushing. You still steer, you still control it, you still have to stop the chair. So if a manual chair is what you're set on, that's something to discuss with your wheelchair specialist as well. So this is a video of a power assist being useful for going up and down the ramp. It's not actually working right now, so it just again gives you an extra push up the ramp. Then there's something called the e-fix, which Medicare does not cover. It's very frustrating. They used to cover it and they no longer did. So the reason why someone would want this is because you could still get it into a regular car. You don't need a handicap accessible van, but it is still a manual wheelchair. It has a motor and it has a joystick on it. So this joystick, you push it like a regular power chair, but this chair has the ability to fold up and go into any type of car for the most part. There pros and cons. The cons, obviously the pros is wonderful. You get to put it in any car. You don't need, a very expensive handicap accessible van. But the con is that it's very heavy for the person lifting it in. The wheels are about 75 pounds alone. So you're lifting up this big bulky thing. You could take the whole thing apart, but I'm currently in New York, so New York weather could be absolutely crazy. Everybody who's in New York, it's been wild weather the last couple of weeks. You're still out there struggling to take every single one of these parts off to store in the trunk of the car. But it is an option for those who don't have Medicare to kind of consider. And then that caveat is private insurances that follow Medicare guidelines also will not consider the e-fix. So it's really understanding what your insurance can do for you. And if you were to call your insurance company and say, do you cover a scooter? Do you cover an e-fix power add-on? They say, sure, yeah, send us everything. They're never going to confront you face to face and say no, that they do it in writing. So they'll tell you whatever you want, but when it comes time for submission to the insurance process, it's immediate denials. So it sounds sometimes like we're being the mean ones, but we've been through this rodeo before. The other horrible thing is that once you have a denial of a chair, you have to wait 18 months before you request another one. So the 18 months is a very, very long time to have to wait when you're in need of a chair, for sure. Then there's manual tilt and space wheelchairs. So these chairs have the ability to give you good support, but someone is pushing you. There's no power on this. They're pushing you from behind, and they have usually a foot control or cables at the hands to adjust your position. So you can tilt all the way back, you can sit upright for when it's time to eat, and you can just be comfortable being manually pushed. And then power chairs. So power chairs, there's a multitude of setups. So there's front wheel drive, which is like the one on the left, where the big wheel is in the front of the chair. And then there's mid wheel drive, where the big wheel is in the middle of the chair. Again, this is part of the evaluation that we're doing. We're considering what the home environment looks like, but also, I have people who say, I have kids, they play sports. I'm on a soccer field, 4 days a week. And that's lovely, because when you have those obstacles of grass and different terrains, you are leaning towards a front wheel drive. I personally am leaning towards a front wheel drive chair because it has better mobility and better encompassing of different types of terrain, like, curb cuts are easier to navigate. uh, and more importantly, if you're driving with a special type of joystick, right? Like a head array or something where you're controlling it with your head or something other than your hand, the least amount of bumps is ideal. So for instance, if you're driving down the sidewalk and there's a crack in the sidewalk, when you're in a front wheel drive chair, there's only four wheels, 2 wheels in the front and 2 wheels in the back that are on the ground. So when you hit over that bump, it goes ba-dump, ba-dump. When you're in a mid-wheel drive chair, like the one on the right side, that's 3 opportunities, 3 bumps. That's an extra opportunity every crack in the wheel in the sidewalk that allows you to lose that drive control, right? So if you're using a chin control and you hit ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump on just a plain sidewalk, you have that risk of like coming off of that drive control and having to realign and get back into your center midline. So these are things that I most often, guide people, you know, through because I think about long term, right? That 5 years sticks in the back of my head when I'm doing my evaluation. And I have to think about, okay, if you're not driving with your hand for more than a year, probably, what are we looking at drive control wise? And what are we trying to do obstacle wise? Um, the other thing that a front wheel drive power chair does is it gives you, when you flip up the foot plate, it gives you nothing in front of you. So people who have like a wide base support to stand up, it becomes a much easier chair. They also have what's called anterior tilt. So the chair can come, it elevates up and it tilts forward. It's what I tell people, it's like the closest thing to an ejector button as possible. It allows you to stand up and it places your feet in front of all the wheels. On a mid-wheel drive chair, you're limited by these front casters. So if you have a wide base support to stand up, right? Meaning that when you go to stand up from a regular chair, your feet have to go out very wide. These become a barrier to you. So these front two wheels. So I consider all of that. You know, when we talk about it, I watch how you transfer. I watch how your caregivers transfer you. I take all that into consideration. The features on a power chair that I get almost all of my pals is tilt and recline. So tilt doesn't change your hip angle. It's the best pressure relieving position you can be in for a multitude of reasons. Um, the recline feature is really nice for people who are like managing catheter or peg. But what happens with recline, when you only use recline, as you open up the back angle, you have a tendency to slide forward in the chair. And then when you close up the back angle, it kind of pushes you further in the chair. You never seem to line up correctly. So I use this combination of tilt, then recline, because once you're in a tilted position, your butt can't slide forward. You're fighting, you're an uphill against gravity at that point. So when you're tilted back, then you can open up your back angle even more, and you get into like a Trendelenburg position where your head is below the rest of your body. And it just allows you to get a little more adjustment. You know, you allow gravity to help you. So for your caregivers, it's a much easier repositioning every time you slide down. But also just being able to kind of, navigate your own body positioning is pretty empowering. There's things that become difficult once you're all the way back in tilt. How do you get out of tilt? How do you go against gravity to push your joystick forward to get out of that? And that's where like the fun parts come in, So once I give you the chair, I tell you that we become best friends because I want you to follow up. If it's becoming difficult to get your hand back onto the joystick after you've been sleeping in the chair for a little while, then I could put in a switch by your head. So all you have to do is tilt your head a little bit and gets you out of tilt. So I want the occupational therapist in me wants you to come back to see me 100 times over because we're going to fine tune all those things and make it easy for you, all with the electronics. Your tilt and recline, I mean, this is just a graphic to show all the different positions you can be in. I mean, it's so many of my pals end up sleeping in their chair because they go from sleeping in a recliner chair, but once you're up and once you're awake, you can't move out of that without alerting someone else. And it's again so empowering to be able to like wake up from your nap or your sleep at nighttime, and to be able to get out of that position, sit upright, and then take off, right? Like go into the other room if you don't want to disturb your partner or your caregiver at that point, and just have a little autonomy. I think that's really nice. People forget that people enjoy alone time sometimes. You don't always want to be with people. So this gives you the ability to stop an argument by leaving, or just having that moment to yourself, which again is so empowering. There's all different things I consider when I'm doing a chair. In this regard, I consider how I'm attaching a ventilator. Is it for all the time use? Is it for a short time use? So if I know that you're using a ventilator every once in a while, there's a chance that you could use it more frequently. So I'm going to put things like medical bag hooks onto the chair. If your insurance doesn't supply them, which sometimes they don't cover that, then we can ask the loan closet to get us some extra bag hooks. This is one of the alternative drive controls. He does not have ALS, but he's my best driver for head control, and it's not working again. Yes, for me. Hold on. He's driving with pads at his head, so he has the ability to move his head better than his arms. So he drives using his head to control the pads. So when he puts the head back, he drives forward. When he puts it to the left, he turns left. When he puts it to the right, he turns right. When he pushes behind him and to the right, he drives off in that diagonal direction. And I don't know why it's not working, but that's okay. This little guy is, he doesn't have ALS either. It's just a great, adorable picture. But this is that chin control that I said you could drive with. You can use your mouth, you can use your tongue, you can use your chin. That little joystick is so hypersensitive. We could put it at your finger and you can just drive with your finger. If you have any, I tell people all this, if you have 2 centimeters of movement in any body part, I could drive. I could get you to drive. And I'm not exaggerating that. I could get anybody to drive with 2 millimeters of movement. So sometimes we have to adapt this and, modify it for better access. For him, he needed to be driving up super high to accommodate for all the scar tissue he had by his trach site. So we modified it, and that was the best way that he was able to drive. I always tell people, don't look at the way someone's driving and say, oh, they need a seating specialist. Sometimes they work best with the seating specialist, and what you think looks textbook is the best thing for that person. So, and then this is an example of so the head part back here, this is what I was talking about, that video wasn't working. You drive with the pad. It's a hidden pad in the headrest, and then you have 2 pads for your right turn and your left turn. You can also have a combination setup where your sip and puff action, it's like a straw. And when I say sip and puff, it's not, people on ventilators can still drive with a sip and puff. It's about negative and positive pressure inside of your mouth. It's not about like actual blowing or like getting lightheaded like you're blowing up a balloon. It's not that at all. So for some people it is easier for them to use the opening and closing of their mouth. Not everyone can have a tight seal around this straw, so it doesn't work successfully. But I also have people who use the sip and puff and head right combination. So they have a resting place. The switch in the back of the head is turned off, and this is their forward drive. Their sip their puff forward, and then they turn left and right using the pads on the side, but they are constantly with their head back on the pad. So they do have a nice resting place, because when you're using just the top part as a head array system, you can't rest on here because it becomes an active a switch, and you'd have to turn it off every time, which becomes frustrating. This is an eye gaze system. I have full permission to use this video every time, and I do hope that she's on here watching, because I told her husband to get her on watching. Of course, it's not going to work. So the eye gaze system, it works through your communication device. It allows you to look at the site that you're looking at, and it gauges. I'm going to try to turn off the video. And it tries to gauge where your actual eye angle is, the same way for an eye gaze system communication device. And it allows you to drive the chair. So it has this extra few cables, and it controls which direction you want to go in. And I guess now we'll leave it open to questions. Yeah. I'll stop sharing.
Lauren, that was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know how you get all that information in 45 minutes.
I told you
But
45 minutes.
you do it every time. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I will go ahead and read them out to you. And some of them are from back in the beginning of your presentation. So
Okay.
what vendor do you use? Do you use home medical equipment on Long Island?
So legally, as a clinic, I have to provide options for many different vendors. So I use home medical equipment. I use, which is a part of National Seating Mobility. I also have a National Seating and Mobility representative as well, and I have a New Motion representative. So those are the only ones on Long Island. There is one other company, but I don't believe that they've received competitive bidding, so I haven't used them. I have to use whoever you ask. So if you tell me that you want to use one particular company, I will work with that company, even if I don't like it.
Great. How about this one? Palliative care versus hospice. Do insurance companies respond differently to palliative care than they do to
So
hospice?
this is a very interesting question. So palliative care falls under hospice. So it is coded under the same flagging. So I've fought with companies many times before that palliative care is not the same as hospice care. I have a great hospice company that two hospice companies that I'm in constant communication with. And we discuss this a lot because palliative care is very different. But for some reason, the way that it's coded for your insurance company comes up the same way. So it looks like you're receiving hospice care when it's really palliative care, meaning you're getting like home health aides or just, respite type care. So there are instances where we do have to clarify that it's not the same thing. The company will write something saying it's not hospice, this is palliative care, and because it just lengthens the whole process longer.
Thank you. All right, the next one we have is when using county-based paratransit, we find that the chair shakes and wiggles even though it's tied down well. Are there any way to cut down on the wiggles? The chair is a Quantum Edge 3 Strato with level.
So, okay, so the Stretto is a small base. That chair is going to have more bumps and wiggles than any of the full base chairs. Um, Usually when we use the Stretto, it's to access things in the house, right? A smaller space, a smaller area. So those pros and cons were weighed at this point. Obviously, access into the house was probably more important than the bumps and the suspension issues, but there are known differences. So you can ask for wheel locks. It doesn't help a tremendous amount. What I always tell people is whenever anyone, no matter what chair they're in, is in the paratransit or ambulette, tilt back the chair because you still gonna bounce around and hit those bumps and feel them. But when you're tilted about 25 degrees, 30 degrees, it lessens the way it goes side to side. So the way the gravity's hitting the front part of your chest, you won't feel it as significant as but I guess
Sitting straight up.
as when you're sitting upright.
Okay, we have a couple more. If you are starting to use an Amazon purchase wheelchair for long distances, is it time to get a wheelchair assessment?
So, as I said in the beginning, if you are using that chair for more than point A to point B, like when you get to point B and you're not getting out of that chair, it's time. It's time.
Okay. And just explain if somebody purchases the wheelchair through Amazon, they're not going through insurance, right? So that's why
Correct,
they're asking
right.
that question.
Yeah. And also
How
like the
about,
loan closet, like the ALS United loan closet is so instrumental, right? So a lot of times I'll evaluate somebody and I specify what I'm looking for and I'll reach out to Ben or, to Aaron and say, hey, do we have this in the loan closet? Actually, right before we went on, I was discussing with Ben for another very specific one. So sometimes it's nice when I request it versus the ALS clinic because I have very more specific details of what I'm looking for. And usually it's like, oh, I don't know how I'm gonna get that. And I'm like, I'll find it, don't worry. And I would try to work with the vendor to see what's in the loan closet specifically. And then there's times that I have extra parts of things. So I'll take the chair from the loan closet and I'll modify it with my parts. And when you no longer need that, I say, please let me know and I will dismantle my parts so I can use it for the next person and give it back to Ben. And it's it's always changing, but that's such a beautiful thing. So that while you're waiting that 4 to 6 months or even longer, if you're on a wait list, you have the ability to be comfortable, even if you don't really know how to truly use the chair, and even if you're really just using it in the house and not getting it, outside.
I'm glad you brought up the loan closet because that is a terrific access for people, especially if they're not quite ready to do that wheelchair for themselves, but they may be having family visit or they may be going on a trip and they might want to have that wheelchair for that activity. And then they might get the idea of what it's like to be in a wheelchair and how much
So,
better they feel at the end of the day when they haven't been walking
so
around.
true. Very
Um, when somebody has a wheelchair that's been made for them and there's maybe a problem, maybe something has to get fixed, do you have wheelchairs for them to borrow?
So the vendors have their own loan closets. They have, we try to handle as much as possible. So I tell people, like, if you have a problem with the chair, you're going to go to back to the vendor. If you have a problem with you, you're going to come to me. If you have a problem with you and the chair, you come back to me. So a lot of times, sometimes people will say like the chair's not working, and it's not that it's not working, it's that they've lost the ability to control it the way that they know to control it, but there's ways that I can adapt it. And in that regard, I do try to make it as comfortable and as seamless as possible. So if you know that you need new batteries, like, you hold on to the chair as long as possible while waiting for the batteries. If your batteries are so completely dead, so many of the vendors that I work with will um, they'll swap out, like they'll give you old batteries to get you through while waiting for the new batteries to get approved and come in. So there's little loopholes that we could do. And again, I could be your advocate. So if you're, or that wheelchair specialist could be your advocate. So if you're finding that you're not getting responded back and there's holdups all over, you can reach out and say, Lauren, where is this? Why am I not getting this? And I can do the due diligence of saying, where are we at with this? Sometimes it's as simple as like the doctor never signed it. And sometimes, more often than not, it's waiting for that approval process again. You can't, so people cannot just change your chair. They can't just repair your chair. They need prescriptions for everything, and not just a prescription. So after the doctor signs it, they need the insurance company to say, okay, we see that the doctor, it goes through a mini approval process again. That's the part that's not fully explained to them. And that's usually the holdup. There's people who will say like, oh, I've been waiting for 3 or 4 weeks and I haven't heard anything. And it's usually because like that they haven't heard anything either. They're waiting for the insurance company to give an approval. 9 times out of 10, the batteries are sitting there waiting to be installed. They just need that approval to come through. So it's extremely frustrating, and I'm sorry that that's not always explained, or it's not explained properly. But that is a very real thing that's happening. New York State, fingers crossed, is pushing through to be an access to repair state. It went through the first preliminary approval, and we're hoping in the next few months it becomes automatic, where you legally have the right to have your parts repaired within 30 days, which means that the insurance companies have to be on board with approving that, which is going to be so instrumental for everybody, not just our pals.
Okay, we have 2 minutes, two
Okay.
questions, and a comment. The comment is Lauren definitely upgrades our loaner wheelchairs. Um, the first question, if fixes to a chair stops when somebody enters palliative care, can fixes begin again if a person is released from palliative care?
Yes.
Also, if it's been a while since the chair was purchased and the person was once in palliative care, is a claim for a new chair automatically declined?
No, not necessarily. Like if you're cleared from that and there's proof on record that you've cleared from that, yeah, then yeah, you can get a new chair. You just have to, sometimes I have to notify them in that letter of justification, say, hey, patient's no longer on hospice or palliative care, and requires these parts. So there are people that come on and off. It's, maybe frowned upon, but it is possible.
And the last question is, where is your wheelchair clinic located?
So I am like a road show these days. I have two different locations. One location is in East Meadow, in Nassau County, and the other one is in Manhasset, also in Nassau County. I used to have one in Suffolk County, but that one has shut because, it's unfortunately, we're not money makers here. So it's a business.
Okay, well, I just want to thank Lauren on behalf of ALS United Greater New York. You did an awesome job as always. I always have
Thank you.
total confidence in you. And thanks again for coming to help us out. I want to let all of those people attending to know that there's another presentation coming on at 12:30. Is that right? How important are vitamins and minerals in ALS? So don't go too far. Come on back at 12:30 and listen to that presentation. Thank you very much, Lauren. Have a great day.
You too.